Does your audio interface really affect your guitar tone? And also, how do you handle gain staging in order to achieve a great sounding production? Welcome to Viewer Questions Answered, episode number 4. All right, Bobby Torres of Frightbox recording here, and let's jump into this excellent group of questions, again submitted by viewers. Okay, and our first question is from Enrico. Hello, Bobby. I hope you can answer this question. Can audio interfaces affect the guitar, bass, or even vocal quality/tone? I've heard about input-output impedance, and I can't understand it. Could you please explain it? Thank you so much, Rico. Well, Rico, this is an awesome question, and I can see why it might be confusing to you because there's so much misinformation out on the internet on this topic. And I'm gonna give you my opinion. In my opinion, 99.999% of audio interfaces are 100% transparent. In other words, they don't really have an inherent sound quality to them, or they don't color the sound in any specific way. It's not like when you buy an analog preamp, a standalone preamp, or work through a console where you're imparting some sort of, analog color. Interfaces are clean. Now, higher end converters and interfaces in general feature more features, like let's say they might have onboard DSP processing, or more ins and outs, or just overall built much better. Like for example, I love my Motu interfaces. They're a little more high end, but again, they could take a beating. Whereas some cheaper interfaces I've used in the past still got me amazing results that sound, in my opinion, just as good as the Motu. They're just a little more fragile and just couldn't handle as much abuse as my Motus. Now, some people obsess about this whole impedance thing. That's why some guys claim that certain guitar cables or microphone cables might even sound better than others. And in my opinion, it's all bullshit. I do spend money on good cables, but not because they sound better, but because, again, they're built better and I don't have to worry about them breaking when I'm working with clients. So in a nutshell, no, audio interfaces do not affect your vocal, guitar, or bass, or any other tone for that matter. What you put in is what you get out. And as a matter of fact, there is an awesome video on YouTube. It's pretty long, it's like an hour long, where a guy named Ethan Weiner, who's a professional acoustician, breaks down in detail and explains from a scientific standpoint why these myths really make absolutely no sense. Again, from a scientific standpoint. I'll leave a link to that video below in this video's description. I highly recommend checking it out. It has saved me thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in gear I don't really need. So Enrico, thank you for your question. All right, let's get to question number 2. Okay, and this question comes from Kyler. Hey Bobby, what's your approach with reference mixing? Kyler. All right, Kyler, thank you for your question, and it's a good one. I'm gonna explain to you how I used to use reference mixes and how I recommend not using them. What I used to do in the past is I'd pull up a reference mix and try to make my production sound exactly like said reference mix. The reason why this doesn't work is because the tracks in the reference mix are not the same tracks that I was working with, or you might be working with. So for example, something I would do is I would zero in on this snare sound and obsess and try to make my snare drum sound just like the reference snare. Not paying attention to maybe the reference snare is a sample and I'm using a live snare, or maybe they're both live snares and they're tuned differently, or mic'd differently. There's so many different variables that come into play when it comes to mixing or production in general that trying to achieve the exact same mix as, let's say, a reference mix, it's really not an effective way of using reference mixes. At least that's what I've come to learn throughout my experience. Now, with that being said, I do use reference mixes from time to time, but I don't use them in the same way. The way I use them now is I just listen to the overall coloration of, let's say, a reference mix that I really like, and I use that to compare to my mix. So let's say the overall brightness of the guitars, or the overall punchiness of the drums, how much they're cutting through, or maybe the overall color of the screaming vocals, things like that. But I always keep in the back of my mind that these are two different productions and they're never, ever, ever, at the end of the day, ever gonna sound exactly the same. I use reference mixes just for listening to the overall big picture color palette of the track that I'm referencing. Now, I also want to mention this. The other way that I do use reference mixes is when I refer to mixes that I've done myself, or maybe if I'm working on an EP or an album and I have to reference one of the other tracks on that same EP or album to make sure that the tones are consistent. But in this case, it's different because I'm using obviously the same exact source tones since they were all recorded by me within the same tracking session. So hopefully this answers your question and helps, set you in the right direction when it comes to how you can use reference mixes more effectively. Great question. If you're wondering why I keep wearing this beanie, it's because I need a haircut. Okay, question number 3 comes from Jason. Hello, Bobby. Nice to hear you're doing this. I'm wondering about balancing a song before a EQ mix, then once every EQ is on, how to rebalance, because the levels are all over the place. Second, how can I edit vocals, balance the waves, and how do I sit them properly within a mix? Thanks for your help, Jason. All right, Jason, these are actually really great questions, and I'm happy you asked them because I've been doing this for a long time, and sometimes I lose sight of just basic things that I kind of take for granted just because, again, I've been doing it for so long. So to answer your first question, you brought up a good point. Let's say you have a nice, rough mix going, right, with no EQ. Then you apply your EQ should you change your overall balance. In my opinion, change anything that sounds like it needs to be tweaked. So for example, in general, when I do a rough mix, I do all of my high passing on all of my main tracks, and then I set an overall balance. But sometimes once I cut frequencies or boost frequencies, I might have to adjust some of these tracks, and the same thing goes for compression. Let's say I have my overall rough drum mix going, and I decide to hit my snare drum with a little more compression. I might have to readjust the level of my snare drum in my drum mix. So the way I see it is I try not to follow any set rule. I get a great mix going or great balance going. I apply my EQ and compression, and if anything needs to be tweaked, I simply just tweak whatever needs to be tweaked. In other words, I don't set my balance and say, I'm never touching this balance ever again. I always allow a little bit of wiggle room to achieve the best results. Now, as far as editing vocals is concerned, I really only focus on 2 different things: timing and pitch. Now, timing is rarely an issue, to be honest with you, if you're working with a vocalist that's a halfway decent musician. Sometimes I'll have to tighten up doubles, but for the most part, it's not as, much of a big deal as, let's say, drum quantizing sometimes is in technical metal or guitar editing or bass editing, because vocals are sitting on top of your mix, so they don't have to be absolutely dead on to the grid. But with that being said, if I am recording a singer that pushes the beat or, is behind the beat, I'll certainly edit the timing. Or if I'm recording doubles and they're kind of out of sync, of course, I will edit these. Now, the second way I edit vocals is, again, when it comes to adjusting pitch. Let's say I'm recording a clean vocalist that needs a little bit of help in the pitch correction department. I'll pull up Melodyne and fix whatever needs to be fixed. And I just want to say this: just because you're using pitch correction does not mean you have to completely make all of your vocal tracks sound like, a cheesy hip hop track with a ton of auto-tune. Mixing and production is an art form, and it all comes down to your own personal preferences. The way that I like to use pitch correction is I only correct the things that stand out to me. Unless I'm working with a band that actually wants that auto-tune sound on purpose, which, believe it or not, back in the day when Gent first broke out, I actually had people wanting this sound, but luckily that's kind of died down and people just want their vocals to sound natural. And again, I'll only pitch correct the things that sound pitchy to me. And this is how I edit vocal tracks. Super simple. An excellent question. Okay, our next question comes from John. Love your channel, Bobby. As someone with a DIY punk background, your advice on getting the most out of the gear you already own is gold. 2 possible questions. Apart from stock plugins, what is the one paid plugin you absolutely cannot live without? And B, as someone who does his band demos using MIDI drums and is always interested in adding realism, what is the self-written MIDI drum pattern you are most proud of? Cheers, John. Well, let me answer part 1. The one plugin that I would say I absolutely can't live without, I would have to say, is the SSL the SSL Master Bus plugin. Now, I just want to say this is only when I'm working within Pro Tools. Believe it or not, the actual stock compressor in Reaper, when I do mix in Reaper, in my opinion, does a very similar thing to what that SSL, the Waves SSL plugin does. So I guess I would have to say it would be the Waves SSL Master Bus compressor, because I'm primarily mixing in Pro Tools, and Pro Tools is my main DAW. Now, I'm sure I can find a substitute or use the stock plugins within Pro Tools. I've done it before, but I just really love the way that that plugin gels mixes together. But again, the stock compressor plugin in Reaper does a very similar thing, and that's because of the auto release function. So any compressor that has an auto release function, I found, does what I need it to do for master bus compression. Now, to answer your second question here about MIDI drum patterns or MIDI drum performances that I'm most proud of, I don't want to name any specific bands that I've worked on, but let me just tell you this. I've recorded in the past some drummers that didn't know the parts, didn't know the songs, and couldn't play to a click. And unfortunately, I would have to program their drum parts. Most of the time, they were cool with it and knew that they didn't come to the studio prepared, but there have been a handful of times that management or a label needed the record and I had to do it in secret, or I had to do it in secret with the rest of the band as my hat falls off. Now, the reason why I'm saying I'm proud of these productions is because never has anyone been able to spot that these were programmed drums. I'll look at the comments on YouTube and people are like, oh, this drummer sounds sick, when in reality it's just, you know, easy drummer with my samples loaded on top of it. When it comes to production, and if you're getting paid as a producer, you have to do whatever it takes to make the product accessible and professional sounding. So that's my answer, and great question. Okay, and our next question comes from Alec. Hey Bobby, your videos completely changed my mixing process when it comes to guitars. Now my workflow is really fast and simple and sounds better than ever. My question is about getting off the starting line to become a recording/mixing engineer and get paid for it. What are the first steps to getting work in? How did you do it? I've heard you speak about working at other studios before, but I mean more from the point of a view of Frightbox. Kind regards, Alec. Okay, Alec, this is a great question, and I'll just briefly tell you how I got into production. I never planned on being a producer or engineer when I was playing in bands as a kid. As a matter of fact, most of the time when I would hear about production, I just had no interest in it. It wasn't until I started tracking my own demos at home in the early 2000s that I say to myself, these are sounding okay. So over time, I eventually picked up a digital multi-track recorder. I think it was a Zoom. I don't remember the exact model number, but you could record 8 tracks at once and you can mix, I think, 16. Now this is when MySpace was a thing, and I remember putting up my band's recordings on MySpace and people would hit me up asking who recorded the recordings. And at the time I had no plan on actually recording bands, but people offered to pay me for the service, and that's how I got my start. It kind of snowballed from there. Once this happened, I then decided to go to school for audio production, and then I interned at studios. But to be completely honest with you, I could have done it all without any audio school. The internship definitely helped. I got to see records made in the real world, but most of what I learned came from just real world experience and chugging away working with real clients. Now, if I were to do this all over again, by far, the number one piece of advice I would give to myself if I were talking to my younger self would be to do free work, like let's say a single for free for an awesome band in my area that I really liked. Only a single, not an album, not an EP, just a single. Once I was at the point that I felt comfortable and that my records were sounding kind of decent, at least of my own music, this is what I would do. The reason why is when you work with a quality band, people will end up hearing the song or the mix that you give them or the production that you give them. And this will 9 times out of 10 lead to more work organically. It's not too dissimilar from what I did when I started out. Again, I was not intentional at all. I had no business sense. I didn't even plan on running a studio when I started out, but it was the same thing. I would do local bands and then other bands would hear the records and then ask who did it and would want to record with me. The thing I did wrong back then was I worked with a lot of very bad bands. And in my opinion, working with bad bands, it's okay if, you know, when you're starting out, but it won't help you gain clients. If anything, it can actually hurt you because when people hear these bad sounding records, they will often blame the engineer and not the band. So this is why I always recommend, if you're starting out, to offer small, remember you want to limit your time, a small project to a band that you really like, that's really good, really professional, and do it for free. At least that first project, because if they like it, they will be willing to pay for more work. Bands that are serious are willing to pay. People that nickel and dime you to death, I'm gonna be honest, in my experience, are not worth your time. They'll never respect or appreciate the work that you put in. That's just my 2 cents. So Alec, I hope that answers your 2 questions. Okay, and question number 6 comes from Ricard. Hi Bobby, I'd like to hear your opinion on gain staging, both in recording and in mixing. There are so many different opinions out there. Dude, I know what you mean. Some say to shoot for -18 dB, some say -6 dB, and some say as hot as you can without clipping. What do you think? Love the channel, I learn something new every video. Regards, Ricard from Norway. Well, Ricard, I'm so happy you asked this question because gain staging is such a hot topic, and I'm gonna be honest with you, man, it's really blown way out of proportion, especially now that we're working within DAWs. As a matter of fact, I did an interview with Jordan Valeriet of Hardcore Music Studio, and we had a nice little discussion about gain staging, and he pretty much has the exact same view that I have. I will leave a link to that interview below in this video's description so you could check it out. It's pretty cool, a lot of great information in there. But I'll give you my view on gain staging. Super simple. Just don't clip. That's it. In other words, when you're recording, don't clip on the way in, and don't clip any of your plugins internally. So if you have a compressor and you have the output cranked, try not to clip your EQ plugin. But to be honest with you, nowadays with 32-bit float or whatever they call it within DAWs, you can clip and it's not actual clipping. But even with that being said, I still like to be careful and I make sure none of my plugins are clipping within my DAW. And I record my signals relatively hot, but with enough headroom so I don't have to worry about them clipping my mic preamps on the way in while I'm tracking. I don't overthink it. I don't think about numbers. I don't say to myself, oh, I'm not gonna go beyond -18. It's all nonsense in my opinion. People claim the sound is better and more analog. No, it's all baloney. Now on the flip side, you don't want to record too quiet because then when you boost it in the mix, you'll end up with noise sometimes because you'll be bringing up the noise floor. But that's only if you're recording super quietly or if you're only recording at 16-bit. I mean, most people these days record at 24-bit anyway. So in short, just record at a level where it's nice and hot, but you still have plenty of headroom so you're not clipping on the way in. And don't record super duper quietly and you'll be good to go. And also, if you want to be ultra careful, don't clip any of your plugins. That's what I do, but even that I've heard people say that that's not even necessary. Super simple, straight to the point, but it's worked for me for the last 16 years, and it'll work for you as well. I just want to say thank you to all of my email subscribers who have been submitting these awesome questions. It really helps me out because, again, it helps me kind of gain a perspective of someone that's starting out because I've been doing this for so long. Things like gain staging or interfaces are things I don't think about anymore because, again, I've been doing it for a long time at this point. So if you have any questions, submit them and I will definitely be answering them in this video series. And again, if I haven't gotten to your question yet, be patient. I will definitely get to it within one of these upcoming videos. I've just got so many that it's taking a while to get through them, but I will get there. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload one of my weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. You can both like and follow me on Facebook and Instagram. Links are in the description below. Now, if you're struggling with guitar tone, you could download my free impulse response. There's a link below in this video's description. It's an IR of my favorite Mesa Boogie cab out of my studio, loaded with V30 speakers, mic'd with the classic SM57. Load it into your favorite amp sim plugin and get right to dialing in killer metal guitar tone with ease. Again, the link is in the video's description. Download and enjoy. Till next time, happy mixing.